The world is an extremely large place, and although it's full of deserted towns that are forgotten by people for long periods of time, it doesn't make them irrelevant. Join us as we have a look at some deserted towns you'll actually want to visit. Kurchatov, Kazakhstan. Now, if you enjoy a deserted town with a ton of dark history, then you may want to check out the town of Kurchatov. It's located in eastern Kazakhstan. It once served as the headquarters for the Soviet Union's atomic bomb testing program, and the tests would be conducted because the city was known as a closed city. However, it can be visited with special permission. The town was so secretive, in fact, that for years it didn't even have a name at all. Just a weird postal code that was shrouded in mystery. Eventually, the town did take on a name, but it just so happened to be named after the head of the Soviet nuclear program, Igor Kurchatov, and to this day, the name has just stuck. For 40 years, the town would serve as a scientific, logistical, and administrative center for the Soviet Union, and at its peak, it featured a population of 40,000 people. After the closure of the testing site and the Soviet military's departure, the numbers in the town tended to dwindle, as did most of the town's economy. A few people do still reside in the town, holding on to the idea that it may once prosper again, but the economy still revolves around nuclear technologies, although those technologies are no longer of a military nature. The town does still have strict security restrictions, especially when there's a mysterious new load arriving to load or unload at the secretive train station with a different name from the town itself. And if you're interested in dark history and beautiful eerie buildings reflecting the Soviet Union era, then this place should be on your list of places to get to. Hirta Island, Scotland. St. Kilda is a small group of 4 islands in the North Atlantic where its nearest neighbor lies 40 miles to the west. But beyond St. Kilda is Labrador, Canada. The Hirta Island is home to one of the world's largest colonies of puffins, a small military installation, and a once very vibrant and thriving community that lived on the island. People lived on the island for 2 millennia and used small boats to travel back and forth between other places. Puffins were also the favorite snack of the island's inhabitants. But it was then in the early 20th century when erosion would begin to ruin the island, and the traditions of the people, which included sheep farming, weaving, and fishing, began to go away. The island was made of Gaelic-speaking islanders who had not been influenced by the rest of the United Kingdom. The young islanders were burdened with the idea of leaving their home, but knew that if they stayed any longer, there would be nothing left. And so they took their traditions and immigrated to Melbourne, Australia, where they founded the suburb of St. Kilda. After World War I, influenza and contaminated farmland decreased the population from 73 in 1920 to just 36 people by 1928. Then, by 1930, after the death of a young woman from appendicitis and pneumonia, the rest of the islanders would request to be permanently evacuated to the mainland. On August 29th of that year, an evacuation would take place, and the villagers left behind a plate of oats and an open Bible in each of the cottages before heading off to begin their new lives. These days, the island serves as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for both cultural and ecological reasons, and has significant bird colonies along with a population of sheep. In fact, the sheep are one of the UK's rarest breeds, and if you're interested in exploring the area, you might just be in luck. As it turns out, a number of boat operators run trips to St. Kilda from the mainland at Oban. Also, use caution and wear a hat, because nesting birds don't really like people and they're prone to attacking you. But as long as you have a hat on, you'll be treated to some of the most beautiful sea views and stone architecture that the world has to offer. Kayakoy, Turkey. Originally, this town was called something else by the Greeks and built in the 1700s. It was also home to around 20,000 Greek Orthodox residents during the earliest 20th century. However, by World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, this meant that the land would be up for grabs during the Greco-Turkish War. When the Greeks lost, it meant that there was still much violence and retribution against the remaining Greek Orthodox communities on the new Turkish borders. Hundreds of thousands of them would flee the area in fear of violence, and that would lead the government to try and come up with an agreement in order to stop all of the bloodshed. The residents had lived peacefully beside their Turkish neighbors for many years, but had also abandoned the town and fled to Greece when the struggle to house 200,000 refugees during the government exchange would occur. Over 1 million former Turkish residents had fled before the official exchange, and 300,000 Turkish people were forcibly removed from Greece. The government attempted to come to an agreement and even hired polar explorer and Nobel Prize-winning Norwegian scientist Fridtjof Nansen in order to organize a peaceful exchange between the populations. These days, 350 homes sit empty and nearly roofless, along with 2 Greek Orthodox churches and beautiful fountains that once could be scattered around the city. Harsh winter conditions have made the buildings look more like ancient ruins than anything else, but it does still have a beauty about it that's haunting. Kayakoy was adopted by UNESCO as a World Friendship and Peace Village. So, if you're ever set on a visit, the nearest airport is Dalaman. Then you can take a short drive from a nearby village, or if you're feeling extra athletic, test yourself with a 2.5-hour trek along a marked mountain path in order to get to the deserted city. St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo is possibly one of America's best preserved ghost towns and is frozen in both time and history. The town would be founded in 1880 during the gold rush days, and during its peak featured about 2,000 people who were there specifically for the mining trade. It would take about 10 years for the city to grow with a nice little economy, which included a telegraph office, a general store, a town hall, 5 hotels, a local newspaper, a school, and some Wild West saloons, along with some dancing halls. Before disaster struck, it really was a boom town. Most of the townsfolk worked in 3 mines, but the Mary Murphy mine was the most profitable of the 3, having recovered $60 million worth of gold during its operation. Of course, while the other mine shut down, the Mary Murphy mine would continue. That was until the abandonment of the railroad in 1922. Eventually, miners had to move on and look for work somewhere else because the mines in the area all dried up and nothing was left. The town slowly began to be deserted, except for the postmaster, who stayed until his death in 1952. The town is considered a ghost town today, although people do still live there and tourism is booming. That's because people come to the area each year for the ATV trails, the fishing, and to also visit the general store, which is open each summer. St. Elmo is a must-see spot if you're ever in need of a little Old West American history. Vallone dei Mulini. Italy is home to some of the world's best ruins, but it's the Valley of the Mills in particular that we found rather enchanting. The buildings around Vallone dei Mulini are haunting and seem to be part of some kind of extraordinary ancient ruins, although they were only abandoned in the 20th century. The structures are overgrown, eerie, and interesting, which makes it one of the region's most visited tourist destinations. The area is also located deep inside of a crevasse that was said to have been formed by an earthquake, which also followed a prehistoric volcanic eruption, and its name comes from the presence of a mill used to grind wheat popular in the region. The mill would be partially abandoned in 1866 because of the Piazza Tazo above the gorge being constructed, and it would end up cutting off access to and from the valley below, and the area was then seen as unsuitable to either work or live in because of its humid and damp conditions. Eventually, the area was completely abandoned, and the once beautiful structures were then taken hold of by nature without the help of humans to keep it at bay. This all makes the structures appear as if they had never been part of mankind and had been abandoned for centuries. The area is still considered to be one of Sorrento's most beautiful locations, and has even attracted artists from all over the world to photograph and paint the valley, along with the abandoned villages. Getting a tour of the area is actually pretty easy. Many visitors come, especially in the spring and summer, but explorers are told to be cautious because the valley can be wet and slippery if you aren't careful. Gouqi Island, China. Gouqi Island may look like it should be part of the cover of the Emerald City for The Wizard of Oz, but it's actually a real place which belongs to a group of about 400 islands known as the Shangzi Islands. The entire area relied heavily on the fishing industry and was one of the largest fisheries in China. Many of the villages have become abandoned recently because many of the larger industries diversified to require other things. However, some of the best preserved villages are located on Gouqi Island, and it looks as if they've become part of nature themselves. The islands can be visited by tourists, but there's not many resorts or even developments nearby because it was primarily a fishing village and fishermen still come during certain months of the year. The mussel farms especially draw revenue for China, and the tourism industry of Dawang Beach is small, with just about 4 to 5-story hotels scattered around. Fishermen will still take groups of tourists out to fish, where it's just a line and a hook with bait in your hands. You fish with your hands and can feel the fish bite, but don't expect anything too big. Maybe just some guppies or tigerfish. The island is also famous for its beautiful towns, which have been overrun with nature, as the fishermen moved closer to the towns and cities of the mainland. But if you're ever in the island in the late summer, you can find wolfberries, also known as goji berries. Ancient Chinese medical practitioners still use the berries for a variety of ailments. Those include dry skin and dry cough, and the berries are extremely nutritious to eat, as well as have quite a few health benefits. There are many vacation spots to visit. Somewhere warm, somewhere cold, or somewhere with corpses. In these modern times, we bury our dead or cremate them. What we don't do, generally, is build catacombs using their skulls. But that doesn't mean it hasn't happened in our history. On the other hand, sometimes corpses are found in mass in one place, for whatever reason.